6:30 a.m. Today's date is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022. Another sunrise in Pineland, and good morning, and the Lord's blessing be upon you all this morning. Hope you're having a very good day. Thank you for tuning into the program. Just a reminder, if you want to support this program, the Venmo CVC PRV, P.O. Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442. Super chats are always enabled, even though I'm up way too early for most of you guys to be here, and that's okay. Hopefully, I'll be able to see your live chats today. I'm purposely touching the thing here to tell me that you are saying things. So hopefully, maybe it was my fault. We don't know. It doesn't really matter. But I'm here now, and we'll do a morning show. May only go a half hour today. We'll see if I got a full hour. I mean, because I'm not feeling great. It's minus 15 outside today, and it's just I'm tired. But today we're going to use the show to look at what's happening, take a broader view of things. Things continue ongoing with the convoy up in Ottawa. A flashpoint to keep an eye on is there is a crossing. I think it's called Coates, or Coates, I don't know how it's pronounced, between Alberta and Montana, where they got some truckers who shut it down for a little while, although they appear to have opened one lane, which seems to have alleviated some of the stress, which, I don't know if that's true or not. I actually saw a video, too. I don't know if it's true, but where theoretically the Canadians went and they took out a quarantine camp. So we'll see if that's true or not, or at least we see damage of a place that looks like it might have been, and who knows. I mean, I don't have context, so I can't say that's true. Interesting if it is. But certainly, the blessings go up to them, the people who are trying to fight their country back. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about. Just do it as a little monologue here as a preface to the show. People ask why a convoy, why something like this doesn't happen in the United States. And the problem is a little bit simpler, which is that I think the people who are most understand that the America that would exist if we just got rid of mandates, which weren't as bad here as they were in Canada, is not a country many of us would want to go back to. Yes, I think broadly agree we don't want mandates, but we understand there are bigger problems. Like, I've been watching some of these groups, and they write these long-winded constitutional declarations. We want to do this and this, and they try to fit everything in an 18th century context. And look, I'm all about historical context. Lord knows that's what we do on this channel, and that's what Pinelanders are proud of. But what I think we have to begin to look at is the question of what unites us, what divides us, and what logical divisions make sense. Sometimes the pathway to peace involves putting people in different places, and the idea that people can have different beliefs and live in different areas is not a crazy one. The idea that they have shared sovereignty where one puts an imposition over another, just like we're seeing with Trudeau in Canada, or we're seeing in Biden in America today, is a problem. And I'm sure people felt the same way when Trump was in there, and I understand that. And having logical lines, good borders make for good futures, where you put people who want to be with one another, and that, we're heading towards an age of selective sovereignty anyway, which is to say that people can choose different paths, at least for the moment, and we already see that because the elites practice it, right? They are able to have a different set of rules because they can buy themselves into an upper class where they have certain privileges. So this system already exists. What we are resenting and what we are presenting, if you want to put it that way, is the idea that poor people or middle class people or people who are otherwise trapped, we are trapped in countries like workers are trapped in corporations, that we are seen as assets of a nation to be used and utilized how they want, and to be removed at will where there are other people who control us. And that's part of the neo-feudal world order we see happening. And what we're going to talk about a little bit today are some of the pieces that are coming into play. Just want to share a couple quick hit stories, and we're not going to read all these, but I want to go into them just enough for you to have a flavor, and as a means to get you introduced, hopefully, to the Telegram page, which is something that we very much would like for you to be able to use. And it's a place where a lot of stories and things that otherwise cannot be shared can be put into place, because there are things I just can't put in here, otherwise I'll get myself into a lot of trouble. But I did want to share a couple things that I just want to put this out there because I thought it was interesting. We got a lot of people who track transhumanism. This was from wonderfulengineering.com. Europe's first quantum computer with more than 5,000 qubits was launched, and the Germans were involved with that. That you could see they put 5 million euros into this. It's an impressive looking machine. It's a D-Wave machine, actually. I can tell from looking at the signs on it. And so what they're doing is they're buying high-end quantum tunneling machines, which is basically, we've covered this in this channel, but for people to remember, what they do is they tunnel into other dimensions. It's weird. Get into the science if you really want, or go look up D-Wave quantum computing. Geordie Rose is a guy who's spoken a lot on it if you're curious, and what they were doing was they were digging between dimensions. And basically it's this way, if you want to think of it this way. If you want to see what would happen in a different world, the easiest way is to go there. Sounds strange, but that's what these computers do. They recognize that matter exists in a state of probability, and that the thing a quantum computer is that between, much like I said in my schizo stream, somewhere between this and that, it exists in a place of an unrealized other. So if you want to think of it, it's like Schrodinger's box, right? There's a cat in a box that has a 50% chance of being dead. Is the cat alive or dead? And the answer is you don't really know, but you can go and take a look, and you won't know until you look in the box, and it'll change every time you look in the box. And if you look in the box 100 times, 50 times theoretically it'll be alive, 50 times it'll be dead. Although it won't really be 53, it'll be 50, it'll be 53 and 47. So you look at that, and you can see what happens when things change, and you can do that with any number of things. That's what quantum computing does. It takes advantage of looking at relativistic states of matter where things are existing in other configurations, and then once something is solidified, everything else locks around it. I mean, the math of it's really actually quite fascinating. I mean, you have to be a total geek, and it probably, frankly, you need a little help to understand it, but it's an interesting thing. But I wanted to share that with you. I want to share two other things with you. So we see, we're talking about China for a second here. One of the things that was interesting is the Epoch Times, not Epoch Times, TND, I think I forgot what the abbreviation is. But the people Jennifer Zhang works for, she's Taiwanese media, and Epoch Times is paid for them. A lot of the nationalist right-wing media is actually Taiwanese-owned, oddly enough, because they want to make sure someone stands against China, and they don't have the luxury of being accommodationist like the neocons are, who are more interested in the concerns in the Middle East than they are in the United States. Anyway, in any case, they're saying that the U.S. Last week got a major defector from communist China who's helping them get their hypersonic missile weapons machine online, or a program online, because apparently the problem was the U.S. couldn't do the math. And what a crazy thing, Hey, good to see you, Promethean. Just go ahead, listen in, enjoy your work day. Hope it's all going well. God bless. So with this this defector supposedly coming along, and I think part of that might be try to remoralize, and maybe it's true. I mean, I'm sure that the U.S. is offering a lot of money, and I'm sure a lot of Chinese want out. I mean, their system is abysmal, and I've been watching some of the preparations for the Olympics. But our good friend George Soros has been out there, and you all know who he is. I don't need to say anything about that. And he says Xi Jinping is the greatest the greatest threat to open societies face today. The country's roiling real estate market, falling population, his words, and spreading Omicron variant may be his undoing during his prestige project of the Winter Olympics. Okay, so everyone hates the lizard man. We all know that. But I think it's interesting that you see this push against him right now, because I was watching something, and these are videos. I can't share them here, otherwise I would. Well, maybe I can share them. Let me try this. Let me see if I can do this. Maybe it'll work. So I want you to see, this is what China is actually making. All right, let's see if we can get that volume up on this. This is what they are investing in, and this is what your Western money's coming into. Now, this is their newest robot dog. It's called the Mechanical Yak. I guess I don't know how it translates. But these are sort of things that Schwab and these other people are funding, because they want a future where they don't have to fight you, where they can send their little things to fight you. And you have to forgive me, I have things at double X speed because I'm just me. I mean, it's fine. You guys probably can't speak Chinese, and if you do, I apologize. I hope your Mandarin's up to snuff. But you can see right here, this is an example of something they're doing. This is the Mechanical Yak. This is what you're going to be facing in the future, and I've been reading all sorts of stories about the integration of technology into man and warfare here. Okay, we'll give you one other one. This is the other one. That was called the, what's the name of it? It doesn't say. Okay, this is called the Ninox. Whoops. 1 second here. This is literally a drone launcher system. So this is what they're building in China. I just want you to understand. So don't pause. Oh, it's only 12 seconds. The Ninox VRS, Vehicle Reconnaissance System. So you can see it has drones that go out to check its thing. And it wouldn't be much a thing to have weapons go out there so you can fight. This is the future of infantry conflict coming out there. And I don't know what America has, because we don't talk about the same way, but I'm sure we're walking down a similar line. So I wanted to share this with you so that you understand the world order you're fighting against is one where people are expendable because machines will take your place, because they're more reliable, they do what they're told. At least in theory, they do what they're told. Eventually, sometime, the machine may say to you what you're told to do. And that may be the end of this whole story, the Skynet future. We've talked about that. Good morning, John, and good morning to all the Pinelanders who are checking in with me early this morning. I always love my early morning crew. I always get some important people late at night, but I'm sharper when we're here this time of day. So I'm going to share one other thing too. I wasn't going to, but let's take a look. I don't know. These are random source intel reports, but this is supposedly in Canada. This is supposed to be a quarantine camp that was out there, and I guess some people found out where it was, and I don't know if it's true or not. We'll replay it so you can see, but open source intelligence could be anything, because there's a lot of different camps like this, emergency camps and whatnot. But I guess some people got pissed off about it. I believe it's supposed to be in Ontario, but don't quote me on that because I'm forgetting the context. I saw it, but I thought that was interesting. So we were taking a look at that, just some things and pieces in the news. So another thing I wanted to talk about is U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Mr. Lactation himself, has been going out there saying that he wants to spend $1 billion on putting speed cameras all throughout the United States. And he says this is part of vital public infrastructure. So at the same time that our roads are falling apart from potholes, they want to put cameras on every corner to watch you. And if it's not immediately obvious, the reason for this is the government wants to be able to track people even more aggressively. Speed cameras in multiple states have been banned. In fact, in Maine, they're illegal, as well as they're in New Hampshire and a number of different states. Texas is one, Florida's another. Surprisingly, California. The states that allow it actually overwhelmingly are in the South and the Midwest. I don't know why that is. I guess it's the whole theory that if you were doing something wrong, you have nothing to hide. I don't know. Plus, people drive slow in places like Ohio. I've just noticed that over the years from living there. But in any case, what I have noticed in this deal is that it's an opportunity for them to put out a system that, frankly, is inadmissible in court. The Fourth Amendment guarantees that you have a right to, there has to be a witness that confronts you. And unless you agree and sign to the ticket, if you ever get a speed camera ticket, you don't agree to it. There's no one to actually speak. So you are actually incriminating yourself when you agree to one of these tickets, which is something lawyers let people know real fast, and then they went away. This was a big issue back in Arizona a few years back, so that's why I learned a little bit about it. But it's something we should look at here. It's the cameras are despised. He actually picked up the plan from the UK. And remember, Pete Buttigieg, what do we know about him that we learned a little while ago? He was another one of those people that was in the World Economic Forum Young Leaders Program. So it's not surprising that, when he comes back from vacation, the first thing he wants to do is put a Voyeur camera on everywhere in the U.S. So something definitely we want to keep an eye on going forward. This is something that was voted on. The Democratic Party voted for it. They forced it through on their own. And they said, we're going to put infrastructure in. And the infrastructure they want is not to make your life better, but to make sure that your life is not a threat to their life. And this is what we've seen increasingly done with separation, isolation, demoralization, depersonalization. If you wanted a better example of that, some of you, I'm sure, watched Trudeau's speech yesterday, where he went out there and he basically called everyone out who was there a terrorist and they were evil. And he said that they're destroying monuments. I watched the thing. That the worst case scenario, the guy was holding a sign and a flag, the Terry Fox statue. Inspirational story of a kid who was fighting a disease. And there were literally flags and memorials at his graves. Now, Justin Trudeau was proud to acknowledge with Black Lives Matter, who toppled the statue of Sir John Macdonald, the guy who literally was the first Prime Minister of Canada. So I want you to know, just keep in mind the blatant, bald hypocrisy of this. And yet, they continue to push forward harder and harder. And there are different stories going on out there of how the police are trying to block off different parts of the convoy. And we are literally seeing stories from parts of Ontario where we are having now ATVs drive gas to the truck. So that is something we are seeing more and more frequently. Another piece of news that I saw here, don't have too much on this, but this is from Financial Times, so I don't have the details of it. But the UK government and a venture capital firm with links to the CIA have taken stakes in a Cambridge-based startup aiming to commercialize the use of graphene in electrical devices. Those of you who know what graphene is, it's a highly electrical conductive material. Basically, you take graphite, which is an iron alloy, and iron oxide, I think. No, iron oxide rust. You take the iron alloy, and you pull off strips, and then it becomes this thin wafer-like single cells. They say it's the first two-dimensional substance. And what it does is it has incredible tensile, the strength capacity, and electrical conductivity. And a lot of people looking around the world, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, are looking at what's in certain injections that are out there, and they claim to be finding this material. And that this material is a conductor that would be necessary if you were going to have biotech, that it actually allows the interface, if you want to think of it that way, between the neurological system, which operates at the speed of light, accepting only the jumps between neurons, and that the sort of electrical system of fiber optics that we have enabled, that you see coming into thing with more satellite systems. So something to take a look at. Give you a little piece from the weird esoteric thing. Interesting videos out there, and I'll post some of them for you if you want to take a look. Some people are arguing the moon isn't what it seems to be, that they've been seeing strange visions of the moon at a weird angle, wrong place, wrong size, wrong shape, wrong color, and people think maybe they're trying to hide something up in the sky. Something to keep an eye on. I have seen, as anyone has seen, it's just like weird little things. We teach ourselves to overlook things we don't expect to see, but like seeing the moon during the day a lot more, seeing the sun look bigger. Like the other day, I was driving home, and I looked at the sun, and the sun was bigger than I remember it being any time. I remember when I was young, I'd look at the sun and go blind. I couldn't see. I looked at this thing, whatever this was, assuming it's the sun. Fine. But I was able to look at it, and it was weird to me. I shouldn't be able to look at it. And it's just something that's sitting in the back of my mind. I'll put some videos up. Dana shared some interesting stuff with me, and I think there are things that are weird that we have to be willing to consider. So I think that's important. We're having meetings at the UN Security Council. Let's cover that, where America and various allies have called Russia to the table to talk about Ukraine. Russia's claiming it doesn't want to attack Ukraine. Ukraine's claiming it doesn't want to go to war with Russia. A lot of talks about what's going to happen in the Donbass. The Germans and the French are trying to slow that thing down. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Russia's just playing for time or if they want to do something more aggressively. The problem for Russia is they kind of put the thing out there. Was it just that they wanted to get into a conversation with the West, or was it that they wanted to accomplish something more? I guess time will tell. I mean, it seems like for the moment, a little bit of a thaw is happening, a little bit of a conversation in the hypocrisy of the West. I do suspect what's actually happening behind the scenes is that Russia's doing incredible work in tearing apart NATO from the inside based upon Europe's interest. They've been looking for an alternative source of gas and oil to go to. In theory, that could have been the United States of America, but the globalists who worked together destroyed our growing and burgeoning oil industry and made sure that that wasn't a viable option. So now Russia can control the gas pipelines that will go to the rest of Europe on its own. And then look, that's fine, maybe. I mean, in fact, if I was all right, let's say they made let's say they made good old Lord Tom Emperor, right, for a day. What I would say is the path to peace in Europe is pretty simple. That France, Germany, Italy, the core, the western core of the EU forms one civilization. That you have Russia and the countries in its near periphery, Ukraine and Belarus, in another, and the ones in between can pick either if they want to be neutral or if they want to be part of either bloc. So if you're like a Poland, if you want to go ahead and be a fully part of the EU, and then let's normalize those borders, and that would be a sane pathway to peace. The only reason I don't like it is because I know neither the EU. I know the EU does not represent the interests of its people whatsoever, and that's why I have to hate that concept. I tend to be a minimalist, not a maximalist. But sane geopolitics, that would be the pathway to peace. Same with the Union State of Russia, Belarus. Maybe they'll add some of those separatist republics. And eventually Ukraine's going to end up in that orbit. It's just the way of it. Sooner or later, they will. They've decided they're not going to permit them to get away, and they have enough power and sway and enough influence over Europe to make sure that never happens. Especially considering now that the Chinese are probably going to be friendly to the Russians, and that arrangement, alliance is a bit strong, but that understanding will govern what the Europeans want to do because they need to sell into that market and they look at the U.S. with inconsistency. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why there isn't a convoy in the U.S. too, just a little thought of it. A lot of people are saying we should have one too, and there are people trying to form one from California going to D.C., but they can't decide what they want to fight for, and this is the problem. I mean, some people have very long lists, some people have very short lists. My helpful suggestion I made in the group is to indemnify Pfizer, to indemnify the CDC, and identify the officials personally who were responsible for this. One of the things that the convoy has done very well in Canada, which would be much harder here in the U.S., I suspect, is it brought together people who have taken the jab and people who haven't taken the jab around the idea of freedom. And here in America, we have already self-segregated to a point that that's a little bit difficult to put together. But what we are seeing is a lot of the people made the suggestion in the convoys that we need to be going to our individual state capitals. Maybe that's a good point, but I think America is at that weird point in the game where we have so many contradictions and so many hatreds that I think, honestly, and it brings me no joy to say this, but this is genuine analysis, we are more inclined to fight one another and impose new things because we're too mad. And I don't know how we stop being angry. I mean, I guess the answer is the Lord Jesus. That's the easy answer, right? That you have to forgive and forget. And for those people who are willing to go forward, if we would come together and unite and say, okay, maybe the places, I mean, actually, you know what? If we were going to do this, if we were going to have the convoys, we don't need to go occupy Washington. That's a waste of time. We need to go occupy every one of those Federal Reserve banks. You start talking to them and you take that back and then they're a little flunky over at BlackRock, then you can make a lot of things happen. U.S.'s problem isn't our government, or rather, our government is a symptom of a larger problem, which is that our requirements of what money does on the international scene is why America is corrupt beyond resolve. And until you solve that, you're not going to solve it. In the end, Ron Paul was actually right about that one of the battles that we really needed to pick was that battle about fighting the Fed, ending the Fed. And at this point, they're going to put out a new currency. Maybe what we need to be doing is our convoy needs to be something to replace the cash, And if until we solve that, I know the people with Bitcoin were trying to solve that, but you need something where mass buy-in's happening, not where a few winners are looking out for their own narrow interests, because then you're just replacing one elite with another elite. And eventually that's going to happen, but you want that to be based on something other than just mere accumulation of capital, unless you think that's the best way to do it, and some people do, and anyway. So you see why it's really hard for things in America to be fixed, and that's why as Pinelanders, we actually argue and advocate for secession and separation, on whatever terms that is, because you want to build a society that's caught up in more fundamental basis, which is we talk about it from faith, folk, and family. But really, what we're talking about there is that you need an absolute belief to guide you, a culture that's built on that, and people who will adhere to it. Because you want people standing up for their beliefs, and we've seen this. I mean, look at how woke culture wars, and you're going to have most people in any society support what the primary thrust is, both in terms of the public propaganda and in terms of what is socially practiced. And when those two work together and the country stands together for the interest of all, that's when you have the best of all outcomes. And is there a little bit of manipulation? Yeah, it's theater. I mean, people go through theater. Rites of passage is what it's about to be a human being. We only learn through imitation. Having novel ideas is a very difficult thing. And even if you have them, good luck trying to have people understand them. You watch the schizo streams. You tell me if you can make sense of that. But those are the sort of questions that we're looking at today, and what I'm wondering is, as we go forward in this, there's going to be as much pressure on the mandates. One of the interesting stories is the UK is backtracking very, very fast from their COVID restrictions, and from what I'm reading, I've been trying to get a deeper story on the ground. Part of it's the politics, of course, but a bigger part of it appears to be that there are a number of lawsuits going through about who is held responsible for when these things go badly, and that there are laws over there allow the police to go after certain people. It's very much in the weeds sort of stuff. But what it is also revealing is that if you start making people be held to account for what happens to the people who get sick from these things, all of a sudden nobody wants to back them anymore, other than the sort of people who are above this and say people are going to get angry and we're going to fight this anyway. And if they start moving away from the COVID agenda, which it seems like they're going to have to do, we're going to have to A, see the launch of some new worse bug out there, whether it be true or just propaganda, or B, we're going to have to see a new trauma inflicted on people. And it seems like one thing they might try to do is, if the convoys try to stay, the truckers' convoys, they'll blame the supply shortages that have been long waiting on them rather than on the people, and try to turn the people against one another. Now, the supply shortages are coming. That's true. That's already been a problem. Anyone who's watching, from agriculture to logistics to international transport, we can see these things. And look at the weather being so crazy. You think that isn't causing damage? Absolutely it is. But beyond that, what you see is the governments and their artificial mandates, who can work, who can't work, where the inspectors are, what they're checking. All of those things play a role, as well as the selective use of law enforcement. So what we will see is less food available before long. And if the truckers decide that they're going to play the full game of chicken to the fullest capacity, and there's enough to do it, they can shut down the ability of food to get to people's mouths. And you could say, hey, if you were of a certain mindset, and this is something we predicted, it's something I suggested in the coming Civil War books indirectly. For instance, let's say you were fighting the Battle of the State of New York. Okay, let's just pretend we took the map of New York and put it somewhere. And let's pretend upstate was red, and it's more complicated than that, and downstate was blue in New York City. All you would have to do is not have trucks going to New York City, and you'd have the war of all against all. You'd literally have Snake Plissken, being the guy fighting for the Duke of New York, if you know what I'm saying. That would happen very, very quickly. And so the government here has to keep certain pieces moving, because the government's saddled with the least useful people they have, because they decided to use that to give them electoral strength and to give them the sort of popular strength. But on the same hand, they also treat them as highly expendable. Look at how they treated them with the jab agenda, basically treating them as an experiment. At the best case scenario, treating them as an experiment. The worst case scenario is even worse to imagine. I mean, they didn't know the outcomes unless they did. If they knew the outcomes and they still did that, they were evil. And you can look at the record of what Fauci supported if you want to, make your suggestions about what actually was true there. So as we look at all of these different pieces in play, we understand that the biggest power that we have, and the truckers have kind of revealed it, is the power to not do things. So, and what they would love is to have a whole convoy coming to D.C. so they can use other police powers. The truth is, we need enough people to stay home to make things change. And in some ways, the truckers are forcing that in Canada. And if we could do that here in the United States, maybe that makes a difference. I mean, who knows? Maybe you park trucks, in front of every bridge. Let's say you blocked the crossing of every major bridge of the Mississippi, the Hudson, the Ohio River, and you had 30 trucks on each side. And and in Canada, what they did was, the government's next move, apparently, from what you're hearing on the ground, was that they were going to hire all the tow trucks to get them, and all the tow truck drivers in Ottawa said they can't because they were quarantining over COVID, which I thought was a very clever answer. I mean, who knows if it's true or not, but it's a great story, and it made me laugh. So we have to be able to do the same thing. But even if we did that, the problem remains, what are we doing it for, to what end? And this is the problem of America. America doesn't know what it's about. Let me put it differently. America is about comfort and about being able to do what you want. that is not long term sustainable because there's nothing. It allows us to most efficiently utilize the resources around us, but it is an absolute death knell for the ability of productivity and building for the future. We are trading off our past, and our past, we are starting to exhaust that supply of prestige, of resources, of relationships, and so we need to restart. Given that we were so high, man, it's hard to land soft when you were at that level. Canada lived lower; they lived closer to the ground, and Australia, they had worse oppression. In some ways, we would have been better served if we would have had worse oppression to unite us, but it hasn't united us. And the hatred that they put out there of saying that the Trumpsters were so bad, I mean, half the country's going to hate you no matter what. This is why we keep ending up in this civil war scenario. It's very hard to escape unless you pick a group of people and escape. And I thought for a moment that when we were looking at this, that the persecution of the people who did not take the jab would be sufficiently powerful to give us critical mass to maybe have escape velocity. And that's something Pineland absolutely supports. But the problem is they're going to let up. And they're going to let up because they don't want to have clear groups of people who are well resolved come out of this. They want the morass. They want the mess so that way they can utilize these assets to the very last minute in enabling the other global systems of totalitarianism we see, such as in Europe, such as in China, in other places where they're pushing harder into the gap, and where they basically have treated the Anglosphere as jettison fuel, which is, maybe not totally historically inappropriate considering how England has always played the game, and by that, America and the English-speaking West in general, against Europe as they're building their sort of new thought of how they're going to construct the world, which is technocratic, totalitarian, and it's transhuman, actually, the three T's. So that is where these battles are going. So what do we do now? Well, we want to see the Canadians succeed. And who knows, if in fact the government there pushes back and a fight comes on that basis, in a lot of ways, maybe it's a better fight for us if we end up having to get drawn into that, and maybe that will unite certain groups of people, and it'll give a new vision for North America that would not be necessarily terrible if leadership emerges that has an actual viable vision. But I will tell you, if your viable vision includes any form of reform of America in its existing form, all you're going to do is find new faces with the same old ideas, because the financial relationships fundamentally will not change between who are the productive class and who owns them. The reason why Washington operates the way it does is not because you elect evil people to office, or because, I mean, yeah, you do, but that's not the problem. The problem is because evil people pick and control the system of who gets in there, from the level of who you're allowed to talk about, who's for it, and even who you're allowed to have as opposition. I mean, a person like me never has a chance to say things like this, and not that I'm not that good a person. Believe me, I'm really not. I'm a sinner, and I own that. I pray to the Lord Jesus for repentance every day. You should too. But my point of it is that you don't have anyone who's allowed to get in there who's actually invested in the people and in their broader interests. And how we define the people, well, that's the question. Right now, we define America as a geographic construct, which is basically to say if you have a big bucket of water, it's everything that's in it. But it could be everything. It could be anything, and it could be nothing. And that's kind of the problem. So we go to these slogans that aren't really true, and these terms that may have had validity in certain contexts, but don't really anymore. And in the meantime, while we are wallowing, we see the technology come forward. Now, am I being too cynical? Maybe, because here's what I've noticed. I was in Ron Paul's movement. I was in Occupy Wall Street and the Fed. I was in the Tea Party. You'll find videos of me speaking in Pittsburgh in 2011 if you're curious. I'm literally talking these paths, the Americana path. And the problem is, you walk that path. I saw what happened. Americans for Prosperity, David Koch's group, went in there and they offered money to the leadership. The leadership ended up supporting open borders, saying, oh, we'll get something, you'll get something, it'll be great. And at the end of the day, what we end up with, no wall, a bunch of people coming over, and the idea of what was freedom put in a way where it was destructive to the cultural ethos of America, because ultimately nobody on the right wants to practice the reality of exclusion, which is to say, this is true, this is not. We like this, we don't like this, we want separation from you. And even the Canadians, as much as I love them and as I'm excited for what they're doing, they're making the same mistake ultimately. And that if this works, they will remove one tyrant, but they won't remove the cause of the tyranny in their society, which is that there is no morality at the center of it. And this is something that people are not ready to hear. And right now, I'm not going to rain on anyone's parade. Any reversal that gets people thinking and asking questions is good, because that might force to a fight that would be favorable. And then on the backside, health can only come after sickness is identified and excised. Everyone wants to try to do the easy cure until you have to realize you just have to rip the whole thing out. And sometimes you even have to amputate. It's that bad. the U.S., you might have to scrap this for parts. And people say, oh, but I love the idea. That's the problem. You love the idea, but the idea is disconnected from the reality. I have this conversation at least once a week where I'm like, when was the last time? I say, tell me the 5 things you love about the U.S. In fact, you do it in your own head. And then ask yourself, how many of those 5 things does it actually practice? How many of those 5 things do you see from the top 5, top 10 leaders you can imagine? Whether they be in politics, in finance, in banking, in corporations, in technology. There's no spokesperson for it. There's just this memory that lingers of something that was once really good, and like we can have that again, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe we need something new here, and that's the argument I make. It's easier to have something new than to be saddled by the heaviness of all those people who are going to drag on what was once before, and that's what people have to understand. And I know people aren't ready for that. That's fine. That's why we're out here. We're out putting the cultural commentary far ahead of the game while we are watching, and we are. It's a race, really. Can they put out the technological bionic surveillance system that will watch all of us? And they are racing too. The people who are in charge, the elites, they understand this, and their time is short. We have maybe a couple years, if even. I don't know that we have that much. Which is why anytime people are fighting against the system, they are our allies. We must support them. And, it's not, you can't. People with genuine ideas can't come to the front of this movement. It has to be leaderless, and it's a hard thing because you're basically stuck riding a force of nature. There are certain predictabilities you can see in it, but ultimately, I get asked a lot, why don't I do things differently? Why don't I do more? The problem I'm trying to resolve is how you reconstruct civilization here in North America, okay? That's the problem. And the answer is you need a certain sequence of events to play out. You need to it's an art form rather than a science, and you have to watch and figure out what pieces are put into play. And that is one of the problems that is very difficult for people to understand because we think it's just who has the best idea. It's not the best idea that matters. It's what are people willing to accept and what pressures are against them. And you're really waiting, just like in any combat, what you're waiting for is your enemy to make a mistake so you can come with a counterforce. In politics, just like in war, you find that what you want to do is wait for them to take a blow at you. That's why Trump used to goad people so much, if you really want to know, because then you could take the counter punch. Remember Marco Rubio, he's got small hands. He literally goes into a debate and says, hey, I don't got a problem with my size. And people like that because it gave him a chance to be both the defender and the bully. So certain types of people responded to that. And it's an incredibly effective approach that actually works a lot in business. And I think business being more honest than politics gives a lot of highfalutin speeches where people don't say the truth to one another. And the truth is, we need to what we really need to do is harness the best people, the Pinelanders, and pull ourselves out and then just not ask questions anymore. And this is starting to happen. I was reading an article. I forget where I read it, but apparently a bunch of Germans, Austrians, and Swiss have retreated to Paraguay, and they're building their own community there, in the middle of the north of the La Plata River, over there, north of Argentina. They've gone there, and there are other groups of people doing the same thing. There are people doing that here within the United States. It's something we've talked about. If we get a patron that would support it, it would be a good foundation to build from and to demonstrate in real life how we could do certain things. But people are still invested in the system, and they're scared, and so they're just looking to maintain the status quo. And that fear that if a declining society is a palpable, real thing, you can't understand until you live it, which is that you think the future is going to be worse than today, so you wait on today and try not to look too far into the future, which is why what's happening in Canada is actually so important because it creates the idea that there's actually hope for change. And there are good and decent people, and yet all of them, it's interesting, none of them are in the media, none of them are in the government, few of them seem to be in the police, few of them are left in the health fields, and so we find that we have all this talent and we have no institutions. So what do we have to do? We can't defend the institutions. We can't defend this idea of law anymore. I guess this is where people need to realize that law is a means of oppression used from the powerful against the powerless, and that you need to begin removing sovereignty because you don't have say in what's being done. You have no fundamental right to go make a difference. I mean, how are you going to do it? What was the old joke? There were the 4 boxes. There was the squawk box. You could go talk about things, but no one was listening. There was the ballot box, but, you saw a thing with 2,000 mules. It looks like elections are being fixed pretty clearly here. That there was the jury box, and when you have courts that make terrible decisions, like much of our Supreme Court, including Trump's, terrible choices of Barnett and Kavanaugh, Gorsuch has been solid, so 1 out of 3, that won't work. And then, of course, there's the ammo box, which is kind of what people are thinking. And I'm not endorsing that because Lord knows I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a cage for saying the obvious. But it's you can't fix certain things. You can only start anew. And if we can start anew in a way where we all walked away, but we all want to claim, we all want the toy. You know what it's like? America's like an obnoxious family that the patriarch or matriarch died and there's a will being fought over and everyone's pretending they loved it and everyone just wants to run away with their own piece. You know what? If it was me, I would just walk away. I'll take the smallest cut. Leave me alone. Leave us alone. Pinelanders can do things on our own. We don't really want anything from this except that they're good people. That I want. All right, let's see what people are writing today. I see there's some comments coming up here. Old school counselor, good to see you. And thank you for the gift, John. I appreciate that very much. The freedom focus is easily used against us. It makes it appear we don't care about public health. We should out nationalize them and out science them. Um, I understand the logic. I think talking about health as a holistic issue is important. I think mental health is the place we really should pick the fight, somewhere you're uniquely qualified. The surrendering of what represents normalcy is a slippery slope we've given away way too long. I think the obsession over pharmaceuticals and sort of allopathy at the expense of a sort of osteopath, naturopath approach of looking at lifelong health. I mean, this is something that's very passionate in my own heart, Dana, or Lyme disease. I do agree with you in a way, although science, I think understanding science as a process that's secondary to the idea of what's to the benefit of society, I think that ethics is really what's lacking. I mean, and then you can look at science. I mean, I don't think we lack technical capacity. I think we lack wisdom about the choices we make. But it's a good point to start, and it's always a good point to demonstrate that what they're showing is not aligned with scientific principles at all. And reason, of course, logic is a Western value, right? And certainly one we would endorse. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Comfort and freedom. Yes, that is not sustainable. The Amish are comfortable and free, but they have something much greater community. Not only community, it's a great point, but continuity. It's the idea that they belong to something, that they have a past that they honor, they have a future they look forward to, they have an idea of their place in the universe, they look at their kids as a valuable asset, they value their elders. These are things we desperately need. That's why family is one of the values of Pineland, that we want to have the idea that we respect the previous generation and we will look out for the future ones. And that's why, look, I got gray hair and my beard growing faster and faster every day. I'm not doing this for myself. For me, I can just sit comfortably and figure out a way to make it. I mean, I could be a grifter if I wanted to be. It's not that hard. But what I would rather do is see the kids have a chance, and I feel bad for those who don't. And I mean, the first thing we got to do, I'll be honest, is take them away from technology. Their ability to think is being destroyed by the fact that they are obsessed with images before their minds can process words. It is a very delicate and special thing that built the Western experience is caught up in living the word. If you look at the history of, like, give you an example, the history of New England, okay? Why it was the most prosperous area in a lot of ways in the world when it first came into its sort of being in the years before the American Revolution, after the sort of hard settling times, was because it had mass literacy before anyone else. And why did it have mass literacy? Because people wanted to read the Bible. And both the content of those words and the ability that put forward with abstract thinking, but also an ethical foundation, is something that we worked very hard to get. And this was actually one of the things reformers worked very hard to get in terms of wanting schools. And yet, once we went down that road, it was only a couple generations before we decided to abandon the word for the screen. We abandoned imagination for indoctrination. And I think that if we live in a healthy and sane society, there'd be a lot less screens in it. I'm aware of the ironies of what I'm saying. You fight the battles you can fight, but in reality, much like many Silicon Valley executives, I think kids should be avoiding the screens everywhere. I think it would be better for them. I think it would be better if you had imagination. Give kids some Legos or something, or some bricks, or even if they go outside and play sand. And I know people say, "Oh, you can't turn the clock back." Why not? I tell you what, nature will. If things get bad enough, we'll go back to simplicity. There's a reason why I'm learning how basic electronics work, and even going back to the point of understanding steam turbines. It's it might be going back 150 years. George makes a good point. But it would be and if I'll tell you, if the infrastructure stops and you don't have the ability to replace superconductors, you're going back to pre-electronic technology at the time before microchips. And there were plenty of things we could do. We were able to meet all of our needs, be pretty comfortable, have an excess of food, have a high quality of life, have goods that actually were easier to fix, more resilient, and a society that I think was well structured. I mean, if you could, well, you guys tell me, you're here, and if you could go back to a society that looked like something more akin to like 1950, or you could go forward into what they propose for today, which would you pick? And if you had to make those sacrifices and the choice was yours, which would you be willing to give up your TV and your internet for a society where you would go and speak to one another and your neighbors, and you'd have social clubs and you could go bowling with the boys, go watch the old movie Pleasantville. It was better before they changed things. 150 years ago, cowboys could speak Latin and quote Shakespeare. Absolutely. You look at Teddy Roosevelt. Dude spoke like 8 or 9 languages. People read books, and it's hard to read a book these days. I struggle with it, and you guys know how much I read. I mean, I can read short form stuff, but my ability to concentrate is shot. And I know, Lord, actually, maybe I need a power outage to take some time, but I know you guys count on me for information, so we're trying to help one another, and the job of a good Christian. You look at Christ, he was a fisherman, he was a fisher of men. He went in there where the people were and tried to reach them with the word, and I try to do the same thing in my own way, not because I'm Jesus or anything, but because Jesus, said to try to love people like he loved people, and so I love all you guys, and you see these things, and yet we are still all kind of in a system. We got to begin pulling ourselves out, and it's not a left or right issue. It's not like that. In a healthy society, that wouldn't be a question. In a healthy society, you wouldn't have partisan politics. I mean, that's another problem. Democracy always destroys itself because one party ends up being the rich and powerful, and the other party ends up supposedly being the poor and miserable, but the rich and powerful use them and buy them. Happened in Rome, happened in Greece, happened in England, happened in France, happening here, no different. And these things replicate. And of course, you end up with the best system has small group of leadership, but the problem is the son is always an idiot. It's the heir and the succession problem you end up with. We've talked about that many times over the years, but hey, we could try to do something different. And if we can get enough people together, I mean, it wouldn't take a lot. I really think if you had, I mean, in the big scheme of things, in a world where we spend so much, you could do this all for under 9 figures, which sounds like a huge number to you, but we spend more money than that on a stadium for entertainment, for bread and circuses. Really gives you an idea of what's out there. Actually, let me go on a little tangent here. This is something that's interesting. A lot of people have been talking lately that they want to see right-wing opposition form in the NGO space. Kind of like high-level thinking stuff. I don't think there's the time for this, but in any case, but the thought itself is kind of interesting. The reason why the left is so successful is they have institutionality where they have means for funding to be funneled to them that appears legitimate, and so they get money, so they reform society in their own interest. The problem is the right doesn't own the media, or the bifurcation of the media is such that the left is smart to this game, and they will never allow the right to fund indirectly people that serve against their interest. So we end up having to do things differently. And the problem is we end up having to do things more violently, or we have to do things to exclusion where we earn things through our own labor, and that's a problem. But I mean, the fact that people are thinking about it is a good idea, and the fact is some of them are thinking decentralization. That's why you see so many people moving to Florida and Texas and trying to turn them into bulwarks. And maybe that'll be the way. Maybe the South will rise again, and maybe that's the end of the story. Although there's so many things happening, you're still fighting against the fact that the elite's ultimate outcome, beyond their sort of woke shock troops, is to enact this global system of technocracy where you will not have the ability to exist outside that space, and you will not be able to offer contests. Save that you might be able to take out the whole system. I mean, that's what you'll have to do. And, people, then, if you say that, oh, you're a terrorist, then you would be, because in order to reset things, you'd have to hurt all the people who are dependent on the system. And that's why change doesn't happen, because people are dependent on the system, which is why if we want change to happen, we must do all we can do to be independent of the system. And for that sense, I want to make a suggestion for each and every person listening: stock up on food now. If these trucker convoys get any bigger, or we see that this spreads internationally as it looks to, it will not be long before you will not be able to get the basic supplies you need. And if you can do things where you have redundancy, you should. Like yesterday, we had this great experience. One of our hens laid an egg, and for the first time, I caught the egg right after it had come out. I held a warm egg in my hand, which sounds like a completely stupid, crazy thing, but it was really rewarding. And it was a sense of many, many months of effort of what we've been doing. We finally got things going. We're going to have some good production this year. We're getting through winter. It's rough, thank God. We're only got one more month of really deep winter that has been cold and frigid and awful. And then we'll move forward with our life and what we have to do. And I wish we had more allies. I wish we had more friends. I wish we had more people in space. And, we got some friends. Hopefully we have them coming. But everyone's busy playing the game. And, I'll admit it, I do too. And I'm too tired to go out there and to fight the field every day. But people do, and that's why you need generational living, so that old dudes could actually rest when they get, worn out, and certainly on that pathway. So let's see what y'all are writing about. Let's continue. I saw some good comments in here. For those Pinelanders who have not watched Tom's segment on the idea of an Overton door instead of the classic Overton window, well worth the watch and really listen to what I'm saying. John, if you have that, if you know where it is offhand, please put a link in there to the video or in the comments to this so that people have the opportunity to see that. And that, yeah, they walk through the center of it, and that we need to be able to shift it, and we need to be able to move it instead of in the wall and put it in different ways than what they think. It's absolutely true. All right, we got Engelbert. I was thinking of buying my friend anti-stalkerware so she can protect her daughter from online maladies. That would be good. Better still would be if you don't have them on computer. It's not like use this but don't be tempted. You're going to be tempted. It's find an alternate way. That's what I think, actually. It's okay, George, if you can't type. I can't either. Patch, it's good to see you this morning. God bless you. Hope all is well today. Came on a little early today because I did. I'm getting ready, so let me give you a personal update. What am I doing in my prepping world? I am working to get better at this ham radio general test. I think I finally got inductance and capacitance caught up in my head, and I kind of understand now that, how they have to work with one another. That inductance is really about current, is really about what's the other? Capacitance is really about voltage, and that you begin to understand these little pieces. It's helpful. Although when I try to talk about it, I sound like an idiot, and I know I need to spend more time working on it, and I have to have a tinkerer's knowledge. But of course, this being the government, I have to learn how to do a thing before I know how to do it, which is completely crazy. But that's what it is, and I'm going to work to get my FCC license, God willing. The test in Maine here is on the 12th, so pray for me to succeed in that. Beyond that, what am I going to be doing the next couple days? I'm watching what's happening out there right now, because people ask me often, why don't I put out more detailed stuff? And the answer is there's too much instability, and the situation is quickly molding. You kind of have to have your head on a swivel right now, and I know how exhausting that is. I would say that if you don't have your head on a swivel, what you should be doing is working on your own preparations, and including that mental and spiritual preparations. Take time to read the gospel, to get close to the Lord. And it's okay to take some time for leisure, to get your mind in this. You have to walk away sometimes to have perspective, and I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. So who knows, if things work out the way I think they are, and if things don't fall apart in this month, I may be on the road a little bit come late February, so maybe I'll see some people I'd love to go see, if we could do something. And other than that, that's kind of what's going on here. So what's going on in the world. We'll keep an eye if there's anything interesting that comes out that's really important. Just take a real quick look if there's anything that's coming out early this morning. I have a couple different chats coming forward here, so I actually have my Telegram group up. Please join the Telegram group, by the way, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. You'll learn a lot more, and I save you time. I do a lot of effort curating news there, things that I can't necessarily share here. I do think that we have past peak COVID, at least unless there's a new variant launched. One of the things that is interesting is that we are seeing that China's being really aggressive about shutting that down. Is it because they're trying to hide other things? Is it because they're persecuting their people? Is there something else happening? Maybe an attack was launched on them. I mean, considering that bioweapons were launched from China, even if China wasn't the sole creator, it wouldn't be surprised if some other country chose to take a shot back at them. Biowarfare is a thing of the future, and we're going to have to deal with it. It's awful, and yet it's a reflection of human nature, and that's what it is. We have a sinful nature. We are people that if we do not focus on what is good, and we do not focus on leading each other in that path, if we allow temptations, what is it they say? An idle mind is the devil's workshop, and we have a society rooted in comfort and leisure as our main outcomes. It's not surprising that we end up being a wicked people, and that's why we need things to work on, even if it's just each other. And the Lord understood that, but I think we're going to see other bigger things happen, and the supernatural is a thing. Let's watch how that plays out as well. All right, what we got here? Engelbert writes, to be honest, I'm convinced our focus must be on our eternal reward. I do prep, however, on sheer full spectrum dominance the diabolical agenda brings to the fore. There's a princess sword. Yeah, look, in the end, what I take faith in, Engelbert, and this is a great point you make, is that the Lord wins. Dana's like, she goes to me yesterday, and she's like, how are we supposed to fight these battles? What are we supposed to do? And the version that I said to her was that I was like, the Lord wins in the end. Celebrate the victories along the way, and look past the defeats. And the worse it gets, the closer we are to the end. This is a great story. This is a story of history, and it's a story of redemption of a God who loved his people so much that he died for them to lift them up again. And if you're a Christian, you will be born again into that world, into the belief that the Lord will come to rescue his own, because he's done it many, many times against odds that are ridiculous. And if the odds seem even worse, how much greater will the glory be when the Lord Jesus returns to realize the victory? And even their enemies have to bow their knees before him, because he defeated death. Why? Because he overcame nature. George Soros and what's his name, Klaus Schwab, that go out there to promise you society and nature. What do you want? That's the mass of people standing up for what is our nature, for sin. What they're literally saying is a congregation of demoniacal sin. That's what it is, if you really want to understand. And look what they practice, look what they preach. And they put it in humanist terms to make it sound good. They're very good at turning language. So what are we fighting for in Pineland? Spirit and soul. We're fighting for God and for our ability to connect to him. And I agree with you, Engelbert. It's a good point that comes forward where the brotherhood. That's why I do Sons of Dust ministry stuff. And it's hard for me to do it, because honestly, I'm not that good of. I mean, I am a good preacher, but I'm not that focused. I struggle with it. But it's the men who struggle, who take it seriously, who talk about theology, who read these things, and who try to live the life, even though a lot of times we hate people. We see what's done to them, and yet we see how willful they are. And in that, we see a reflection of our own nature, and that we have to learn to have patience and tolerance to some extent. Not for that which is wicked, and not to endorse or to coddle or to accept those views, but for the person that's there that is lost, and remember that we too are sinners, and say, I love you, what you're doing is wrong, stop. If we could say that, so many problems in our society would be solved, but people don't have the courage to do it, and people wouldn't listen if you did. But for the people who are there, we do it. And, it's a message I need to give to myself oftentimes. I'm glad that you didn't intend it as a reprimand, but I take it as one, because I know my own heart, and I know my own wicked heart, and I just ask the Lord to do work in me. And that's why, a lot of Christians, people who aren't Christian, listening Christians, are like, why are they giving credit to Jesus? It's because we're trying to change who we are. We know we're as bad as anyone else, and we're trying not to be, and we need help. And there's nothing wrong in saying you need help. We all need help. And let's pray on that. That's a great prayer. Heavenly Father, we just pray that you show us your vision for us. You lead us down paths you approve of, and give us a chance to prosper. You say you have those plans for us. We need those in this hour. And that for all those who are trying to speak your truth, please give us the courage and give us the connection. Be there to lead us. So many people I talk to feel so disconnected right now. Lord, we just ask that we be able to hear your voice. That's all we need. So in Jesus' mighty name, I thank you for that gift. Amen. All right. Which potential Pinelandian state has the best quality ratio in regards to land? Can Pineland begin as a purchased chunk of land, however small it may be? Um. Well, okay. That's a challenging question. It's a complex thing. You have to add a couple variables to your equation. You have to add the suitability of laws to exist where you're at. You have to deal with the issues of local ordinances. So you really would want something where, like in northern Maine, for instance, there are areas that are unincorporated where there is no legal authority over you other than the state and theoretically the county. But in functionality, if you put it as a corporation, you could do things. So if you were looking, you would need a place with low population density. If you were doing it in New England, I could say for a fact it would be in Maine. Up in the old days, I would have said places like Montana and Idaho would have been good. I think another one would have been that would have been good. Would have been potentially the UP of Michigan, which has a lot to commend it. But I think some of the things are happening. But if you were doing it here, let's say you had money. Let's say, give me a budget. All right, give me a budget number. Let's say we had $5 million. What you would do if you were doing it in Maine, and this would work in a lot of places, is rather than buying land retail, what you would do is you would buy land corporately. Specifically here, Maine has one of the highest owned groups of foreign ownership of land in the U.S., and the reason why is the Irving family of New Brunswick owns most of the logging mills up here. Northern Maine is basically a giant forest with lots of fresh water, with isolation, good territory. It gets cold in the winter, I'm not going to lie, but you could do it. You could go to the logging company and be like, hey, I want to buy a lot that's X amount of size, I have X amount of money, and you could buy something that's several square miles. And if you bought that, and you bought the basic infrastructure to begin building housing, because this is the problem you're going to run into, I'll tell you right now, is if you did this right, you would have people who want to participate, who have skills, abilities, and knowledge, but don't have assets. We are a movement that is talent rich and capital poor. So what you would need to do is you would need to buy, and I think the best way to do it, you're going to laugh at me, would be to build hobbit houses. And why do I say this? Because you could do it quickly, you could do it cheaply, you have the ability to deal with the single biggest element up here, which is you have to deal with the cold. You have the benefit of that you are now no longer under technological surveillance because you're under the earth, and that a series of excavators and people who have that skill can build additional housing very quickly. And then you build underground structures that, if let's say you're dealing with technology, which is what we're going to be fighting against, you could be fighting against drone warfare, you could be fighting against infrared signatures, you're going to need to think of these sort of things. And we could imagine ourselves being as like pseudo Amish, or we could be wise like serpents and see some of the problems that are coming down the line. So you build this sort of hobbiton in the woods where you would be able to replicate the basic technologies you need. You'd be able to use wood for providing electrical purposes, as well as potentially some element of solar or hydro. I think those are perfectly viable versions of it. You would have a simple machinist-based thing where you would probably need a little bit of a foundry, and you could bring certain things in. I mean, the question of how much people are willing to give up, what connections to technology we could want to have, we could have those conversations. But what you want to have ultimately is the ability to be redundant. So if civilization goes away one day, that you can live at the same basic level of life you count on, which is the ability to grow your own food, which is utterly essential, have fresh water, earth-sheltered homes, very, very energy efficient. And by the way, you could get things. I mean, cars aren't going around as much. If you want to get tires, my good friend Aaron always tells me, earth houses, we could do something like that, but do it a little bit better and actually do it as a planned, organized way. And then you could sell, or offer shares on some sort of level of people who come in there. Everyone who lives there should own a plot of land. I think that's important. People need private property, private space. Everyone who lives there should do some work on growing their own food supply and put some effort towards collective food supply or something that collectively benefits the community. Whether, you work, rather than having the same teacher every day, maybe you have a teacher once a week, or, you change things to help meet the needs of the community, and you have a degree of communal effort and you have a degree of private effort, and that you agree to these sort of things, and you know what you're coming into, and, everyone should be in a pew on Sunday, I tell you that. Certainly, those are things you could do. But yeah, you could do it, and you could do it, like, I'll give you an example. I'll give you a perfect example. This would not be ideal, but it'd be a quick start. Like, if you wanted to race to start this, there's a camp I know of for sale that has 12 cabins, has a big greenhouse. It was used as a camp for, what was I going to say, for hunting and fishing expeditions for under $2 million. You could move enough families there to start a tribe, and if you could buy land that abutted it, it would be a very easy thing to use that as a foundation. That's your front cover, and then you build into it. It's just a question of how serious people are. If people are really serious, this isn't hard to do. It could be done in one season with the right people. Money could ease the way. And, if one of those Bitcoin billionaires, showed up and said, hey, you know what, you can do this. Now, and where could you do it? You could do it anywhere. I think you want to do it in a hilly area, because that hides you better of low population density. Access to fresh water is important. Separation from major military nuclear installations, and this is the problem of being in the southern Appalachia. Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Tennessee, the nuclear research. The only air base they had up here in northern Maine was Loring Air Force Base, closed in 2011. So we don't have anything anyone wants. And if you're not in the U.S., I say the same thing's true of the Miramichi in New Brunswick. Although there's many other places in northern Quebec, and its question is, what are you willing to handle? But if you're underground, mostly, you don't have to deal with the cold, and the snow becomes a water source. And that's what we're looking at, honestly, when I look at, if we're looking at a broader map, Patagonia, I looked at for the same sort of reasons. So that would be some of the thinking. And, if someone wants to go look at doing something like that, you're serious about, you want to have a conversation, what you're thinking, have the conversation. That's why I live where I live. I live in northern Aroostook County for a reason, because this is where I was watching that you could build. You go west of Fort Kent into the Allagash, there is a lot of emptiness. And, hey, I tried to play the lottery too, but I didn't time my cryptocurrency right. And that's okay. I mean, the Lord intends for... Sometimes the Lord doesn't give us what we want because he knows we can do better work amongst people. I would love to go hide and have my perfect hidey hole, and I just don't think God intends that for me. For better or worse, I keep getting drawn into the mess, and I think it's because maybe there's a message he wants me to hear. Or maybe that I need to learn humility. Maybe it's both, I trust he knows better than I do. But I know people. I mean, I know some people who would put some money on the table. We could probably get to $1 million if we really, really needed to, a really good plan. But people want to know what you're going to own, and what you're going to own is a chance to survive into the future. That's what you're really selling. People need an insurance policy, but without sovereignty, it has no meaning. And that's one of the things I like about being in northern Maine, is that if you live in the right place, you could form your own government very, very easily. I understand, because I was a town manager, how to do that. But on the other hand, you can go to other places. You you just have to structure it differently, and I don't know how to do it because I'm not there, but I would imagine you could form it as a corporation, and people don't ask. You put a fence around your thing, you put up a corporate thing. No one ever asks what corporations do. So, and joint stock companies actually were sort of how some of the original Puritans settled, so it's an interesting idea. Not necessarily the most relevant thing for today. I don't think we have time to go through all that, but who knows? If we get to summer and things haven't fallen off yet, maybe it's a conversation to have, and Pineland can become a real place, you know? Right now, we have people. We're recruiting people, so if you like what's good, draw people into it, draw people into the Telegram group, support the program, Venmo, CVC, PRV, and we'll continue doing the work. But it's a great question, George, and thank you for asking it. I love talking about stuff like that. That makes me happy, but it's much more fun to go forward. TRS had a great deep dive a few years ago into the dilemmas Maine faced, due primarily to the cat lady industrial complex and weaponized immigration. So let me share this. Maine, and I live here, and I respect the guys who do that program. I know them, um, obliquely, but I do know that. Let's see. The thing about Maine is that, like many places in the Great White North, as you put it, is they don't understand problems from down south because they don't have them, because they don't have the population density to have them. The immigration problem is an issue, but it's highly localized to a couple places. It's highly localized to the Lewiston area and to the Portland area. It is a problem, but the thing that's offsetting it is the number of people fleeing the disaster that is New York, and to a lesser extent, only slightly Massachusetts, who are coming here and who are filtering into the rural areas. So there's almost an equilibrium. The problem is the right wing in Maine is not good at articulating a case that Mainers can understand, and there's a disconnect between the political class that's coming in here with money and the people on the ground. Most Mainers don't really understand politics other than that they want to live the way they want to live, and they understand deeply that they are connected to the land, and they live in a paradigm where they don't see the value of these fights, and that's why the danger and the success level here is not in a left-wing, right-wing, Republican, Democrat thing, and why you have people as disparate as Janet Mills and Paul LePage able to rule in a state, but you have people that you need to have a new vision of what Maine could be, and Maine separate, and Maine is the center of a new way of thinking of things. It would hopefully encompass places like a New Hampshire, you know, which is a little more libertarian, and New Brunswick, which is a little more accommodationist, and that's what we were working on. And I think if things fall apart, if society goes away tomorrow, New England will reconnect itself in a way that makes sense beyond the cities, and the way New England made sense, you know, going all the way from Halifax down to the Hudson River, really, minus the cities that will become death centers, which you have. Good to see you, Josh, by the way. You have to give me a call sometime. I'll have to have you come up for a visit. Anyway, so that is kind of the thought, but the cat lady industrial complex is a thing a little bit, and the media here is the concerned media, you know, is a real problem. It's one guy who owns it, and there are people who speak out against it, and I think people are more frustrated. I think that if things got bad enough elsewhere, and the bet I've always kind of made is that as things become bad enough, Maine will hold together enough that it will begin separated, and I'd say that's even more true in the county, which, but then again, the county made terrible mistakes. The county, people overwhelmingly got inoculated, and the reason they did it is because they were trying to do what they thought was right. It was really that simple. They were going along to get along. They didn't really think deeply about it. They trusted the authorities, and why wouldn't they? Life is good here. When life is good, people live in a high trust society. The problem of living in a high trust society is people get deluded. Let's see. What if Bitcoin is an AI, ants farming aphids for nectar? Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. I mean, it's an interesting metaphor you use, but the idea that people will be colonized as quantum computers on the march for a computer that seeks more capacity for itself is not an insane idea, and something most people can't conceptualize because they don't have an idea of themselves as a computer. They don't understand how a computer would look at them as a node. People are caught up in seeing the world through their own eyes too much to see it through another's eyes. If there was one skill you could teach to people to really help people understand, it's the ability to both see the world through the eyes of the other and to see yourself within that. Because a lot of people see it through the eyes of the other without having a self-image. That's why you end up with very smart people going down the woke rabbit hole where it leads nowhere, because they can see that others are suffering, but they don't understand their own place, and that they hate themselves too much. And it's very easy to hate yourself a lot. I do that sometimes, but we need to find a balance between them. And that's one of the sort of deeper philosophical kind of strategies. But But I don't know. Yeah, see, this is stuff I like. I like talking about stuff like this much more. I'd love to have. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, if I was offering an inducement for people to buy into a Pineland, community, imagine the conversations we'd have. I mean, some of the people that we talk to in this chat, you guys are legitimately brilliant, thoughtful, experienced, talented. You should see like people. Like our buddy Tim, who's in there. Have you seen his artwork? By the way, he hates when I promote it, but go take a look at it. It's amazing stuff. He does really good work. He's promised to bring me a piece, and I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's that's what we have to do, and it's hard because it's like what Orwell said. No, not Orwell. Huxley. There's this story that Mustafa Mond is telling in Brave New World about how they tried to make a society of alphas. They gave him Crete in the story and said, build this whole society, and they ended up fighting one another. And that's the problem. We who are of high talent don't connect to the people who are actually the nuts and bolts types. We can understand how to do things, but we can't understand how to connect to the people who need to help us. And the biggest mistake I would say smart people make is thinking every other person's smart. It's one of those things. But I agree with you, George, that with Bitcoin, we need to pull out of the physical infrastructure. We need to build our own separated, segregated, independent infrastructure. And it has to be segregated. It has to be disconnected, because if we have whatever links we have to the world have to be disconnected from the system we actually live on, because one day that will be pulled, and then we're going to have to survive. And if we survive and everyone else is against us, that's why I've sort of saw isolation. And this is the contradiction. To fight technology, you need technology, but if you use technology, technology both seduces you and you're fighting against it. Which is why I actually think, and you're going to laugh, but I think this is true, and I think Engelbert would agree with this, which is why we're going to have to learn to develop through faith skills that we haven't had to literally maximize what human potential is in ways where we draw upon spiritual powers that make what they were doing in Pentecost look like child's play. And this is something the Lord says. It's in the book of Daniel that, we'd be dealing with these sort of things in the end times, that we're going to have to go forward. And I know that's something where standard theology is not very comfortable, but I can't imagine any other solution save for help from a higher intelligence that is not machine based. And what is that? There's your angels and God. So let's hope heaven descends just a moment or two to help lift us up. But that's happened before, and that's the story of Christianity. It's why I believe it's the one true faith. And even though I respect people for having faith, I think in some ways they're closer to people than people who have totally bought into the world. It's important to believe the right thing. It's not enough to believe. You have to believe what is true, and seeking that out is the challenge of a lifetime. And I respect people on the search, and I try to be mindful of that. And if people pick a different path, as long as we can live in separation and peace, I can honor that. All right, so I was planning on doing a 30-minute show today, and it's about 6:30 a.m. It's sunrise in Pineland with Tom Kaczynski here. Maybe I need a morning show. I need some guests, But yeah, there are different ways we could do it. I mean, I will be honest with you. I am good at being a thinker. I am good at being a manager. You do not want me to be your finance manager. You don't want me to be the person who designs all this infrastructure. We have people who are much more talented at engineering. I can offer helpful comments as like a consultant. I think what you're saying is smart. It makes sense to me. I don't know how you would implement it. And that's okay. I mean, if the idea is fleshed out and something more concrete is there, maybe we can look at it. Maybe, I don't know. You guys tell me. You want me to try to put something together? I mean, the problem is, I'll be blunt with you. I mean, I'd love to sit and be like, oh, well, what? And every time I try to do it, I get asked the same question by people. Who's buying in? Who's putting in how much? And so we all get stuck looking for a sugar daddy. Unless maybe the answer is to build a corporate entity, to build a business. Maybe we build a consulting firm. I got my friend. I've recently met a friend from Croatia. He's a talented writer, Tony, and he was telling me, about this thing in one of his books he wrote. It's called, what it talks about this idea of an institute that's much like sort of Asimov's foundation that is well funded. That's job is to understand certain things. It starts out as a human intelligence network, but it has assets, and it builds a village that's really deep and allows people to live apart. I mean, kind of that's what the bankers did with Switzerland. Why I think it's not part of the EU, so they can be independent. And it's a good model. Maybe it's something we should flesh out more. I'm open to the conversation if people want to talk about that. I know I'm scheduled later this week to talk about real life homesteading, and maybe actually let's try to do that tomorrow. If big news doesn't break, and Lord knows we could use a day off tomorrow, we'll come on homesteading. I'll try to come on. Let's say. I'll try to do my show at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I don't usually like committing to a specific time because, I just talk when my mood allows and before Dana wakes up. Because a lot of times, you guys don't know this, the reason my show is at the times it's at is because what happens is if my wife wakes up early, I talk to her and then we come on later, or if she wakes up later. Like tonight, she seems to be sleeping, and that's a blessing. Please say a prayer for her. My wife has a lot of kidney problems on top of her Lyme issues, and I fear she's not long for this world in a lot of ways, but in some ways, she's too gentle of a being to have to suffer the sort of things and the brutish things I deal with. I feel bad. I've dragged that poor woman through so many things, but she stood with me. She's a good wife, and I love her dearly and desperately, and a worthy queen, at no doubt, because she would never want to be one. That's my wife, and even if she's the queen of my kingdom, and that's the most important thing, I guess. And then she's a lordly woman, and I think that's a blessing. And that we can reconnect men and women. It's such a bad scene. I mean, there are some good women around, but we were all just trying to do it on our own, and maybe we need a broader thing. I don't know. I don't have the answer to this. Engelbert writes, I hesitate to get into crypto because of the seductive lure of the secrecy. There are no secrets from the Lord. That's true, and the blockchain's job is to see everything that's happening around you. I mean, look, you could have made a buck at it, and it's not bad, but I think we've passed peak crypto in a lot of ways. Until there might be one big burst at the end, but the bottom hasn't hit yet, so be patient. And we'll see. I mean, there's always the next big thing, right? And ultimately, at some point, money itself is going to change. We did a couple broadcasts on that. Go back and find them if you want. All right, it's 70 minutes now, and my voice is getting tired, so I'm going to go make myself something to drink and enjoy the rest of my morning. Who knows? I might come back later. You never know. I'm certainly going to be watching what's happening out there. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your financial support, your ideas. Join the Telegram community, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And if you want to send a letter to me about something you're thinking about, I usually do reply. I'll be on protonmail.com. All right. You guys have a very good day. God bless.